Good morning. Welcome to Amir 5858. I'm Amir. I am thankful to all international news resources and my team. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Asian, African, and Australian news channels and AFP, AP, Reuters news agencies. Now the news headlines. U.S. Supreme Court struck down the federal ban on U.S. Justice Department accused Phoenix Police Department of discrimination. Water shortage problem in Mexico City. South Florida in floods, but improvement soon come. NATO plan to increase support to Ukraine. Russia demand NATO cancel Ukraine membership and hand over 4 provinces to Russia for ceasefire. Hajj pilgrimage of Muslims have started in Mecca. Bishop apologizes to Native Americans. Pope speak about artificial intelligence. Justice Department refused to prosecute Attorney General of U.S. South Africa president re-elected. On Wall Street, Nasdaq, Dow Jones Industrial, and S&P 500 all increased. American cricket team winning. Commander of U.S. Central Command. Now the news had in detail.
Tonight, the case against Frank Stronach. New details on sexual assault charges against the Canadian billionaire. Alleged incidents involving 3 women. Accusations denied by the 91-year-old. Calgary's water crisis reaching a new low. Restrictions could last for another 5 weeks.
This is the most dramatic and traumatic break of the theater main they have ever seen.
Plus, the first meeting between Justin Trudeau and Narendra Modi since accusations of an assassination.
Both the Indian and certainly the Canadian governments are trying to repair the damage.
Also soaring into history on Canada's first commercial electric flight.
Price for electricity for a 45-minute flight is under $2.
And refusing to shake it off.
Welcome to Taylor Swift. I like it.
The campaign to get Taylor Swift back to Saskatchewan.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. The frustrating start to summer in Calgary just got even worse.
Now to the day's other news. South Florida is hoping for a break from the rain after several days of downpours that have led to flash flooding. There's more rain in the forecast tonight and tomorrow, but it's not expected to be as bad as what the region's seen this week. Amna has the details.
South Florida Tuesday night, and for 5 counties across Florida South, a state of emergency declared earlier this week remains in place.
In other headlines, NATO defense ministers approved a plan today to provide long-term aid and military training to Ukraine. The new agreement comes at the end of a 2-day meeting in Brussels. The goal is to protect against disruptions in aid for Ukraine's war effort. That includes the potential for a drawdown in U.S. support should Donald Trump win back the White House. Meantime, in Moscow, President Putin said Russia is ready to end the war in Ukraine, but only if Kyiv ends its bid for NATO membership. He also wants Ukraine to hand over 4 provinces claimed by the Kremlin. Western leaders said the peace offer is not realistic.
This is not a peace proposal. This is a proposal of more aggression.
Putin has illegally occupied sovereign Ukrainian territory. He is not in any position to dictate to Ukraine what they must do to bring about peace.
This all comes ahead of this weekend's Ukraine Peace Summit in Switzerland. At least 100 delegations are due to attend. Russia was not invited. Muslims from around the world have started their annual Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Large crowds arrived at a tent camp in the desert today in the sweltering heat. More than 2 million people are expected to participate. This year's pilgrimage comes against the backdrop of the Israel-Hamas war. Palestinians in Gaza were not able to make the journey because of the closure of the Rafah border crossing in May. U.S. Catholic bishops apologized to Native American communities today, acknowledging their role in a, quote, history of trauma. In new guidelines for ministering to indigenous Catholics, they wrote, the church recognizes that it has played a part in traumas experienced by Native children. That includes the church's role in operating boarding schools that tore children from their families. The Washington Post report last month detailed widespread sexual abuse at 22 such schools. And a separate Department of the Interior investigation found that 500 children died at these institutions starting in the 19th century. Meantime, Pope Francis today became the first pontiff to ever address a gathering of group of 7 world leaders. In his speech to the G7 today, he addressed the threats posed by artificial intelligence.
We should be very clear that decision-making must always be left to the human person. We would condemn humanity to a future without hope if we took away people's ability to make decisions, dooming them to depend on the choices of machines.
President Biden, who's a devout Catholic, had a brief exchange in front of the cameras as leaders gathered around the main table of the summit. The 2 men also met behind closed doors. The Justice Department said today it will not prosecute Attorney General Merrick Garland for contempt of Congress. In a letter to House Speaker Mike Johnson, a DOJ official said Garland's actions, quote, did not constitute a crime. On Wednesday, the House of Representatives voted to hold Garland in contempt over his refusal to turn over audio recordings of President Biden. They contain interviews from the special counsel investigation into his handling of classified documents. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has been re-elected by lawmakers after a dramatic late deal with the country's main opposition party. The agreement between his African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance gives Ramaphosa a second term in office. The 71-year-old's hold on power comes 2 weeks after the ANC lost its 30-year grip on control of parliament. The parties will now co-govern South Africa, in that country's first national coalition where no party has a majority. In Florida, demolition began today on the site of the Parkland school shooting, where a gunman killed 17 people on Valentine's Day in 2018. Crews started tearing down the building at Marjorie Stone and Douglas High School as family members of the victims watched from the parking lot. The structure was frozen in time to serve as evidence in the shooter's trial. He's now serving a life sentence without parole. Officials hope to finish the demolition by the time students return from their summer break. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average slipped 57 points to close at 38,589. The Nasdaq extended its run of record highs, adding 21 points. The S&P 500 ended the week virtually flat. And the U.S. cricket team is bowling over fans after securing a spot in the second round of the T20 World Cup. Those heavy rains in Florida we reported about earlier washed out Team USA's match against Ireland today. That cancellation, combined with last week's stunning win over cricket powerhouse Pakistan, left the U.S. with enough points to advance. It also means that this year's co-hosts qualify for the next World Cup in 2026. Still to come on the News Hour, the retired commander of U.S. Central Command discusses his new book in leading the most active command in the military. David Brooks and E.J. Dionne weigh in on the week's political headlines. And an art exhibition offers a new way of thinking.
Repairs on the broken pipe were supposed to be finished yesterday. It had already been delayed when 2 workers were injured Wednesday night. The second day of the G7 summit saw history being made, with the Pope addressing world leaders at the event for the first time. As the world's cameras were focused on the pontiff, Canadians were closely watching the summit's sidelines, and specifically Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as the pair met face-to-face for the first time since Trudeau publicly accused Modi's government of involvement in the assassination of a Canadian Sikh activist. Mackenzie Gray reports from southern Italy.
He's a man in demand.
Mackenzie Gray in Bari, Italy. Thank you, Mackenzie. There are heightened concerns in the Middle East as tensions between Israel and Hezbollah risk boiling over. For 3 consecutive days, the Lebanese militant group has been launching attacks on Israel's northern border. Israeli air defense systems have intercepted most of the strikes, but some have caused damage and sparked large fires. The tensions between the 2 neighbors have fueled fears over a wider regional conflict since the deadly October 7th attacks led by Hamas, another proxy of Iran. With the current escalation, Israel has issued more stern warnings. It will defend its borders. Crystal Commencing reports.
Reporting that a senior advisor is being dispatched to the region and will arrive in Israel on Monday. Farah?
Crystal Commencing in London. Thank you, Crystal. In Russia, at least 5 people were injured when Ukrainian troops shelled a Russian community near the border with Ukraine. It happened in a residential neighborhood in Belgorod, an area prone to intense attacks. A rescue operation is still underway. About 90 countries and organizations are meeting this weekend in Switzerland for a Ukraine peace summit. Canada's among them. The big question is how to end Russia's war. President Vladimir Putin is not invited to the table, but as Mike Armstrong explains, he is still making major demands.
The first leader to arrive in Switzerland for the talks is the man in the middle. Vladimir Zelensky touching down Friday in Zurich before heading to the venue for the who she believes is behind them. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
A Canadian Navy patrol ship is now in Cuba, just 2 days after Russian warships arrived. HMCS Margaret Brooks sailed its way into Havana Harbor this morning for the start of a 3-day visit. The Canadian forces are calling the trip a recognition of the long-standing bilateral relationship between Canada and Cuba. The U.S., meanwhile, says one of its fast attack submarines also docked on the island today at its Guantanamo naval base. The visit by 4 Russian warships on Wednesday has been characterized as routine by Moscow, Havana, and Washington. The U.S. Supreme Court has lifted a ban on bump stocks, the rapid-fire gun accessory that's used in America's deadliest mass shooting. The ruling delivers a major blow for gun safety advocates as it strikes down one of very few recent efforts by the federal government to address America's gun violence epidemic. Jackson Prosco reports.
The deadly in America's unending epidemic of gun violence. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
More than 6 years after 17 people were killed in a mass shooting at a Florida high school, the building is being demolished. A large excavator stretched to the top floor of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. It punched its first hole in the classroom where a teacher died saving students. Explosives are not being used to avoid potential damage to neighboring buildings. The teardown is being done piece by piece, and it's expected to take several weeks. 14 students and 3 staff members were killed in the shooting rampage in 2018. And a U.S. judge has ordered the personal assets of conspiracy theorist Alex Jones to be liquidated to help pay the families of Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting victims. Jones's personal assets will be sold, but his primary home and some other belongings are exempt. He owes more than $1 billion for his false claims the mass shooting was a hoax. The judge is still deciding on a separate bankruptcy case involving Jones's media company. In 2012, a gunman killed 20 grade 1 students and 6 adults at a school in Newtown, Connecticut. Survivors of the massacre graduated high school this week. Dozens of students from Sandy Hook Elementary wore green and white pins at the ceremony to honor their fallen classmates and educators. U.S. aviation officials are investigating how titanium parts with fake records wound up in some Boeing and Airbus planes. The companies allege they were sold titanium parts with false documentation. The probe was launched when small holes were found in some parts believed to be from corrosion. The issue affects select titanium shipments from a limited set of suppliers. Boeing and Airbus both say the planes containing the parts are safe to fly, but they are being removed from new aircraft that haven't been delivered yet. Transport Canada says it's working to ensure proper management of any safety implications. The Princess of Wales says she's planning to take part in tomorrow's Royal Trooping the Colours ceremony. It'll be her first public appearance since announcing her cancer diagnosis in March. Kate made the announcement on social media today and shared a new photo taken earlier this week in Windsor. She says she's making good progress through her treatment, which is expected to go on for a few more months. The princess goes on to say she's looking forward to attending the King's birthday parade this weekend and hopes to join a few public engagements over the summer. The heat is on. Coming up, the hot weather is expected to hit millions of Canadians soon. Millions of Canadians will soon face an intense heat wave. Early next week, temperatures could spike to record highs across eastern portions of the country as a heat dome settles in. Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell is tracking the weather pattern for us tonight. Anthony.
It's rather comfortable on this Friday late afternoon, and it will be throughout much of the upcoming weekend across southern Ontario and into Quebec. It is early next week that we're expecting this heat dome to build from the southern United States, expanding up the east coast. And as it builds out, several days of 30-degree temperatures are expected, and the humidity will also be a factor, with humidex readings ranging from 40 to as high as 45. Now, it is still the month of June. There are still kids across the eastern third of North America. Farah?
All right, good to know. Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell, thank you for that. More than a year after $20 million in gold was stolen from Toronto's Pearson Airport, a former Air Canada manager is reported to be turning himself in. According to CBC News, a statement from his lawyer says Simranpreet Pansar is preparing to return to Canada and he will surrender himself to authorities in the next few weeks. He worked at Pearson and initially assisted investigators after the crime. He quit his job and disappeared shortly after. Police believe the 31-year-old fled to India. He is among 9 suspects accused of taking part in the largest gold heist in Canadian history. Eyes on the riverbank ahead. A crocodile stalking children in Australia is tracked down. A 4th grizzly bear has been killed by a vehicle on the Trans-Canada Highway. Parks Canada confirms an older male was struck along an unfenced section of the road near the town of Field in southeastern BC. It's the 4th grizzly killed in a road accident in Yoho National Park this month. Last week, a rare white grizzly named Nakota was found dead from what Parks Canada believes were injuries sustained from a collision on the Trans-Canada Highway. Her 2 cubs were killed in a separate vehicle incident earlier that day on the same highway. Parks Canada says visitors can help reduce wildlife fatalities by reducing speeds, driving alertly, and giving wildlife space and respect. In northern Australia, a massive crocodile's reign of terror in a remote town has come to an end. The nearly 4-meter-long saltwater croc had been lurking in a river next to a town, lunging at children and adults. It even ate some pets. Police and park rangers finally shot the crocodile, and then the community cooked it up and shared a traditional feast. Next, how these young Nova Scotia jump ropers have skipped their way to gold. Edmonton hockey fans are holding on to that last bit of hope after last night's game. The Oilers have lost 3 in a row to the Florida Panthers, and now they risk being completely swept in the Stanley Cup final. Another loss tomorrow would mean the Panthers would be awarded the cup in Edmonton. The chance of totally reversing course are slim. The only team to overcome 3 straight losses in the finals, the Toronto Maple Leafs, way back in 1942. Outside of hockey, at least one team in Canada actually won top prizes already this year, and they're just kids. In Nova Scotia, a squad of skippers is taking old playground jump rope to a whole other level. They've just brought home multiple gold medals in a competitive sport that's all about what you can pull off while watching your feet. Shelley Steeves has the story.
They sure don't skip a beat. These skipping sensations in Nova Scotia have jumped far beyond schoolyard fun, bringing home multiple golds in the rather obscure sport of competitive skipping.
I had no idea that skipping competitions were a thing.
Me neither in grade 1.
Which is around the time these preteens found their passion for jump rope.
It's just like a whole friendly sport, and that's what I really like about it.
So it's a very cheerful sport.
Yeah.
But to get to this level, you literally have to jump through hoops to make it to the nationals. A few weeks ago, these jumpers brought home 3 gold medals at the Rope Skipping Canada competition.
I really, really like double dutch.
And if you're one of those folks who struggled mastering the double rope on the playground, be prepared to be wild. These pros take the fun and games to a whole other level.
For freestyle, you need to be able to do like footwork and stuff like that.
And those turning the ropes, just as impressive. Timing on the handles is everything.
Do you feel that pressure of like, okay, I gotta swing these ropes right, because if I don't swing them properly, then I'm gonna mess up my teammate?
Yeah. The goal now, the world's one day.
People come up with crazy tricks all over the globe, and it's really fun to watch.
While they continue to jump high and dream big. Shelley Steeves, Global News, Lawrencetown, Nova Scotia.
And that's it for Global National for this Friday. But before we go, I wanted to share some personal news with you. I've decided to leave this amazing team and news organization. I joined Global nearly a decade ago. I was hired when I was pregnant. Same contract as my male counterpart. I'll never forget that. And since then, being part of the Global News family has been nothing short of an honor. In that time, our industry has evolved, and I've changed with it. I'm excited for new adventures, fresh opportunities in this rapidly moving media landscape. But before I sign off for the very last time, I wanted to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude to you, our devoted viewers, for entrusting me to deliver the news over all of these years. It has truly been a privilege. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.
Welcome back to Daybreak here on France 24. Here are your headlines this hour. Leaders gather in Switzerland to discuss peace in Ukraine, but Kyiv and Moscow are still worlds apart on their conditions to end the war. The French left forms an unlikely alliance and vows to stop the far right amid a chaotic snap election, with thousands expected to hit the streets this weekend. And on the right, it's total meltdown. The leader of Les Républicains insists he's still the boss after his party tried to boot him out for announcing an alliance with Marine Le Pen. World leaders are heading to the luxury Bergenstock resort in Switzerland for a 2-day summit on peace in Ukraine. Russia won't be there. On Friday, President Vladimir Putin again said that Ukraine would effectively need to surrender for there to be peace. Kyiv and its ally, the US, immediately rejected Russia's conditions. And to talk about this, we can bring in Gulliver Cragg, our correspondent in Ukraine. Gulliver, thanks for joining us. How is this summit being assessed by people there?
Well, I think that a lot of people in Ukraine are quite critical these days of Volodymyr Zelensky, and particularly his chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, who is really the man behind the idea of this summit. But despite this, most experts think that the idea of holding this event, which is not really a peace summit in the traditional sense of the term, but more a summit designed at showing the world how many countries are on board with Volodymyr Zelensky's vision of peace, which of course involves Russia pulling all of its forces out of Ukraine. It's in a way more like a support for Ukraine summit, and it was very, very much a priority for the Ukrainians to get as many countries as possible from the global south on board and to have some kind of involvement from China. China is not taking part, and although the Swiss side say that they've got more than 92 delegations and half of them at least represented at the level of heads of state or heads of government, big countries from the global south such as Indonesia and India are not represented. Brazil is sending its ambassador to Switzerland, which is the lowest possible diplomatic level to be represented at. So on those terms, it's not a success, and there are people in Ukraine who've been very critical of Andriy Yermak's approach, taking on the role of foreign minister, if you like, rather than leaving that to the professional diplomats, because he has really taken on a huge amount of power in Ukraine in recent months. But so in recent days, the Ukrainians have scaled down their rhetoric a bit and talked about this summit as just a first step. They're hoping that they'll get some kind of communique out of it that could serve as a basis for further negotiations, to which they've said Russia might be invited. And they've said today they're going to focus on 3 elements of Volodymyr Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, probably the ones that are the least controversial, which are nuclear security, food security, and the release of Ukrainian prisoners of war and Ukrainian children who've been deported to Russia. Families of those Ukrainian prisoners of war have also travelled to Bergenstock in Switzerland to be present and to lobby for as much action as possible to be taken on that front.
You mentioned Ukraine's conditions for peace there. What about Russia's ones, the ones outlined by Putin on Friday?
Well, the Ukrainian leadership was very, very quick to condemn Vladimir Putin's statements on Friday, which he presented as a sort of readiness for talks, but which were really just a reiteration of the kinds of ultimatums he's laid down before, saying that Ukraine has to give up all 4 of the regions of mainland Ukraine that Russia claims to have annexed. I remind you that Russia currently occupies only part of all of those 4 regions, most of Luhansk region, but only parts of Donetsk region, Zaporizhia city, which is by far the largest city in Zaporizhia region, 700,000 people, has never been occupied by Russia. So Vladimir Putin was making absolutely outrageous demands, and he also made a completely false and demonstrably ridiculous claim that Russia never tried to take the Ukrainian capital Kiev at the beginning of 2022. I think the Ukrainians are hoping that his statements yesterday were actually so ridiculous that they can use them as a kind of a justification for why Russia was not invited, because it seems pretty clear that the Russians aren't prepared to put anything reasonable on the table. Volodymyr Zelensky actually compared Putin to Hitler when he was reacting to the Russian leader's statement yesterday, saying that the world should remember the Sudetenland and not be fooled into thinking that any dictator will be like such as Putin or Hitler would be satisfied with some small piece of territory.
Gulliver Craig, thank you very much for your update. Now, the political maelstrom in France continues. Kicking off this morning, around 200 protests against the far right are expected this weekend across the country, organised by unions, anti-racism groups and the parties of a new left-wing coalition after President Emmanuel Macron called a chaotic snap election. In these pictures, you can see protests on Friday. Thousands marched in several cities, with some people injured in Lyon. Up to 350,000 police officers could be deployed this weekend, as many as 100,000 of which in the capital. And the new left-wing family photo on Friday, after releasing their manifesto, its leaders emphasised they'd compromised during 4 days of negotiations and aligned their views on issues such as the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, all to prevent a victory by Marine Le Pen's camp. Cam unites this.
Days of tense negotiations have led to this moment. Socialists, Greens, Communists and members of France Unbowed line up for a historic family photo. They've agreed to unite as the Popular Front, standing against President Emmanuel Macron and the far right.
We haven't slept much over the last few days, but we've managed. Emmanuel Macron wanted to divide us. He actually has managed to unite us with one clear objective, which is to win.
The parties had aligned under a different name during the last parliamentary election campaign back in 2022, but infighting over leadership and policies had led to the alliance's collapse. They say this time is different and have vowed a total break from Macron's policies, revealing their manifesto at a press conference on Friday.
I wanted to talk to you about a measure that's going to affect everyone. We fought long and hard against it. It's the repeal of the pension reform that we will carry out 15 days after our victory on the 7th of July.
Other measures include raising the minimum wage, a price cap on basic necessities, and major investment in public services. The group also promises to continue supporting Ukraine and to officially recognise the state of Palestine. Some things are still unclear from their manifesto and may still need to be ironed out, like a clear stance on nuclear power. But the real challenge will be finding a uniting figure to represent the group, a potential future prime minister.
Meanwhile, the right is mired in infighting. Eric Ciotti declared himself still the leader of the Conservative Les Républicains, appearing to have successfully challenged in the courts an attempt to expel him. His party rebelled after Ciotti announced an alliance with the far-right Rassemblement National, breaking a historic taboo. Our reporter Claire Bagalin was outside LR HQ last night.
Eric Ciotti is staying on as leader of the Republicans Party for now, at least. The court ruled invalid 2 votes which were organised to try to oust him from the party. Those votes were organised by other senior members of the Republicans Party who were against his decision to align himself with the far right. They said he had committed gross misconduct. But Eric Ciotti's lawyers said that the statutes, the internal rules which govern the Republicans Party, simply did not allow for the leader to be ousted and replaced by interim leaders in such a hasty manner, in such a manner as we saw this week. So, what's going to happen to the Republicans Party now? It's torn itself in two with this drama. Eric Ciotti, though, is out on the campaign trail in Nice, in his constituency, and for now, looks like he's staying on as leader of the party.
And in other news, the World Health Organization says there's a health crisis in the occupied West Bank because of increased restrictions, violence, and attacks on health infrastructure. More than 500 have been killed and 5,000 injured in the territory since October. The situation is, of course, even worse in Gaza, where UN aid deliveries are still suspended after an operation on the 8th of June by Israeli security forces, who rescued 4 hostages and killed more than 270 Palestinians. Caitlin Kelly has more.
Cries echo through the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital as Israeli strikes on Gaza's Deir Bala leaves more families in mourning. As homes are reduced to rubble, locals say they have nothing left.
It's been 250 days of war, but it feels like 250 years to us. We wake up and go to sleep hearing the sounds of bombings and airstrikes. We can't find food or anything else.
As fighting continues to hamper aid efforts, the World Food Programme warned of catastrophic levels of hunger across the enclave.
To turn the curve on famine, we need to diversify the nutritional intake, we need to provide better water and sanitation, and there needs to be basic healthcare to really be able to turn around malnutrition among children.
Meeting in Rome on Friday, the G7 called for UN agencies to be able to work unhindered in Gaza. There are also hopes for an end to attacks on aid convoys, as US officials sanction right-wing Israeli group Tzav 9, known for their violent efforts to stop aid into Gaza. The US also announced the temporary relocation of the humanitarian pier to Ashdod in Israel due to weather conditions, halting naval shipments of aid to Gaza for the second time. As Eid al-Adha weekend approaches, families in Gaza should be feasting and celebrating. Instead, many are left hungry and homeless.
The French sparkling water brand Perrier, owned by Nestlé, has suspended production of its 1-litre bottles after problems with several water sources. Authorities say the factory at Vergès Springs in the south of France could remain suspended until the end of summer. Jenny Shin has more.
The commune of Vergès in southern France is home to Perrier, the beloved sparkling water sold widely across the world. But the production of its 1-litre bottles has been temporarily suspended, according to French media outlets Le Monde and Radio France, a move that its parent company Nestlé denies.
We are carrying out maintenance operations on 2 of our wells. This is a regular maintenance operation.
Just 2 months ago, some 3 million bottles were destroyed and a part of its production suspended under government orders, following suspicions of contamination with fecal bacteria, a series of events that are worrying local residents.
It's very bad news, because Perrier has always been synonymous with Vergès. It means employment and prosperity for the village.
Experts say a possible cause could be a mix of rainwater and wastewater after multiple bouts of heavy rain.
This can be blamed on the recent prolonged and intense rain. It's probably occurred already in the past, and will probably become more intense in the years to come, especially due to climate change.
Nestlé says the closure of the wells will not impact its employees.
Finally, they couldn't have wished for a better start. Germany utterly dominated Scotland in their 5-1 victory to open Euro 2024, scarcely breaking a sweat against the subpar 10-man Scotland at the Allianz Arena. It's the ideal result to ramp up excitement in the country after Germany crashed out of their last 3 major tournaments. It's in fact the biggest victory in Germany's Euros history.
For us to win that comfortably was a good sign for everyone and for us as well. I think we can take that confidence going into the next game. I think for me personally, it was quite happy with the game. Of course, there's things we can still do better.
Listen, very disappointing for us as today, because we obviously were coming with great hopes, and I think the biggest thing is we're very proud of the team.
Stay tuned. There's more news coming right up. And now for the world this week.
Help us get over an ex. Yes.
Through art.
The heartbreak storylines are always so personal.
I have never gone to confession before.
Today's the day.
Oh God.
There's no reason to be nervous.
We are queens.
The Art of. Tuesday 9:30 on ABC and ABC iView.
Today, a woman arrested after a man's body is discovered in Sydney's northwest. Also ahead, a major offshore wind zone approved for the New South Wales Illawarra region. Banks forced to be more upfront with customers about rate changes under a new government plan. And the Princess of Wales confirms she'll attend the King's birthday celebrations and says her cancer treatment is going well. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ruby Cornish. A woman in her 60s has been arrested after a man's body was found in Sydney's northwest. Leah Harris joins us now live from Epping. Hi Leah, what can you tell us?
Well, Ruby, officers were called here around 11 o'clock this morning, where they say there was a concern for welfare report. When they got here, they found the body of a man in his 60s. He is yet to be formally identified. They have taken a woman also in her 60s into custody, and she has been taken to the local police station where she is being spoken to by detectives. Now, police have still got this street cordoned off here this afternoon, and detectives have been going in and out as forensics investigate inside that scene. We have spoken to neighbours who say this is normally a very quiet suburban street, and they have been shocked by the police presence this afternoon and in learning what has happened here. Now, police, it is very early in their investigation, but they are treating this as a case of domestic violence.
All right, Leah Harris in Epping, thank you for the update. And if this story has raised any issues for you, you can get help by calling the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline on 1-800-RESPECT, which is 1-800-737-732. Detectives have arrested 11 people as part of a major police operation targeting the illicit drug trade in Victoria's north. Police believe drugs were being moved from Melbourne to an alleged drug trafficking ring operation in Shepparton. Detectives executed 13 search warrants at residential properties and sheds across Melbourne and Shepparton earlier this week. 8 Shepparton men have been charged with trafficking drugs. 5 of them have been charged with trafficking a commercial quantity. The federal government has approved its 4th offshore wind zone, this one in the New South Wales Illawarra. The zone will be 20 kilometres offshore, stretching from Stanwell Park to Kiama. But following fierce opposition from some locals and several community consultations, the footprint has been reduced from 1,400 kilometres to just over 1,000. That reduction means the potential power generation will shrink from 4.2 gigawatts to 2.9.
One of the concerns raised was visual amenity in this beautiful part of the world, which I know very well, to ensure that that visual amenity is protected. By moving the zone to 20 kilometres away, that achieves that outcome. On most days, you won't see the wind turbines at 20 kilometres away, on most days. Also, we've taken into account environmental concerns and shipping issues to ensure a balanced proposal. Also, fishing. Even though we've made the wind zone smaller and further away, it will still generate up to just under 3 gigawatts, which is enough for 1.8 million homes. That's a lot of energy. And it puts the Illawarra at the centre of Australia's renewable energy future.
Polly Hemming, the Director of the Climate and Energy Program at the Australia Institute, says the announcement is welcome, but the government still sustains a strong support for gas and coal.
This is going to be an ongoing issue, constant compromise, and community consultation is welcome, and it's very welcome that proposed projects are already preemptively looking to minimise harm in terms of the environmental impact they have. This announcement, as a whole is very welcome. It's aligned with the federal government's commitment to ensure that Australia's energy production is sustainable and it's clean. It also supports the federal government's commitment to providing Australia's manufacturing industry with clean energy. It's really important to note that it is just an announcement at this stage. It still has to go through further environmental approvals, and for context, it sits within the federal government's ongoing support for gas and coal and future gas strategy, which in terms of both the environment and the economic impacts has the potential to entirely undermine positive announcements like this.
And just talking about that context, I mean, Mr. Bowen says this is going to generate enough energy to power 1.8 million homes. How significant is that in the more general landscape, energy landscape in Australia right now?
It's very significant. This is not an insignificant announcement, and it won't be an insignificant project. The more renewable energy Australia has in the grid, the better. I suppose you can't look at any policy announcement in a vacuum, and what is proposed is very positive, but you're still seeing a contradiction in terms of where the actual support lies.
The nation's banks will have to be more upfront with customers about changes to things like interest rates under a new plan from the federal government. The Treasurer Jim Chalmers says it will help Australian customers get better deals and simplify the process of switching banks. Political reporter Matthew Doran has more from our Parliament House Bureau.
This is all about trying to help Australian customers navigate some of the tricky financial details that are presented. These regulations in place will force the banks to comply. Ruby?
Ukraine has rejected Russia's offer of a ceasefire on the eve of peace talks in Switzerland. Russian President Vladimir Putin said he would end the war in Ukraine if Kyiv hands over 4 of its regions and abandons plans to join NATO. Europe correspondent Catherine Diss filed this report from Kharkiv in Ukraine's northeast.
Security on high alert as Switzerland prepares to host world leaders at a summit for peace in Ukraine. Despite missing the guest list, Russian President Vladimir Putin has set out his own proposal to end the war.
So far, the West has been ignoring
reports which have offset Western sanctions imposed on Moscow. Finding consensus won't be easy. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Ukraine.
The Princess of Wales has confirmed she will attend the King's birthday parade in London this weekend. It will be her first formal public appearance since her cancer diagnosis. A new photograph of Princess Catherine has been released to mark the occasion. Our reporter Rani Hayman is outside London's Buckingham Palace.
In this heartfelt written statement from the Princess of Wales, she details the ups and downs of her experience going through preventative chemotherapy treatment for cancer in the right direction for Princess Catherine, although she does say that she still has a way to go yet.
Rani Hayman there. Cyril Ramaphosa has been re-elected as South Africa's president under a national unity deal between the African National Congress and 3 other parties. The coalition includes the ANC's biggest rival, the Democratic Alliance. New MPs have been sworn in as Parliament moves to elect a Speaker and a Deputy Speaker. DA leader John Steenhuisen welcomed the historic agreement.
We believe that the Government of National Unity, the document of which we signed this morning, is South Africa's best opportunity to get stability for people who prize constitutionalism and the Bill of Rights as sacrosanct.
American President Joe Biden has condemned the US Supreme Court for declaring a federal ban on bump stocks, which turn semi-automatic weapons into machine guns, as unlawful. The justices upheld a lower court ruling siding with a gun shop owner in Texas who challenged the federal law brought in by the Trump administration in 2019, which had banned bump stocks. The ruling was imposed after the device was used during a mass shooting at a Las Vegas country music festival in 2017, in which 58 people were killed. Pope Francis has spoken at this weekend's G7 summit in Italy, becoming the first pontiff to do so. At a session on artificial intelligence, he warned world leaders the technology represents a major transformation for humanity and needs to be managed effectively. Earlier in the day, discussion at the summit centred on China's global economic influence, migration and support for Ukraine.
This has been one of the busier G7s that we've seen in a while, and I think when you look at the agenda of this meeting, you see how the attention is being pulled in so many different ways, technologically with Europe and the United States.
A US judge has ordered the assets of conspiracy theorist Alex Jones be liquidated. Mr. Jones falsely claimed the 2012 mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut was a hoax and now owes more than $1.5 billion in damages. The bankruptcy court in Texas is also considering the fate of his far-right website InfoWars. Since the NT and federal governments announced $4 billion to build social housing, experts have been pleading with the Commonwealth to put people at the centre of design. In the desert town of Tennant Creek, traditional owners are fed up with waiting. They're fundraising to build their own culturally appropriate, climate-friendly homes.
Just a few years ago, this Warramungu elder and his family were homeless while they waited for a public home.
We had two tents, the kids' tent and me and my partner's tent.
Now they're set to build a home of their own. New vision for a future on country. Lillian Rengia, ABC News, Tennant Creek.
Now here's the latest in sport with Jared Coote.
Emma McKeon won't get to defend her 100-metre freestyle gold medal at the Paris Olympics. Molly O'Callaghan has won the event at the Australian Olympics.
Adelaide and Perth will be mostly sunny, and in Darwin, sunny with a top of 32 degrees. And before we go, a chilly morning in Canberra was the perfect backdrop for dozens of dogs and their humans to take part in this year's Sled Dog Shield. There were plenty of barks and cheers as the whistle blew to signal the start of the races. The ancient practice originated among Canada's First Nations people thousands of years ago. Now, sled dog riders use kick scooters, often equipped with mountain bike wheels and long cables attached to their dogs' harnesses. Those involved say the niche sport requires a certain love of cold mornings, but it's all worth it.
It's just the excitement and the happiness of not only the dogs, but the people going out there and doing what they love. They can come back covered in mud, and they're still smiling.
Looks like a lot of fun. That's the latest from the ABC Newsroom for now. Remember, you can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and, of course, on ABC iView. I'm Ruby Cornish. Stay with us. Close of Business is up next.
This is Asia Now.
Good afternoon. It is noon in Singapore and Hong Kong, 9:30 a.m. in New Delhi and 11 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Yasmin Yonkers. At this hour, the U.S. sanctions what they have described as a violent extremist Israeli group for blocking aid convoys transporting humanitarian supplies to Gaza. Day 2 of the G7 concludes with leaders pledging to tackle what they say were harmful business practices by China and condemning its support for Russia's war with Ukraine. The group also threatening further sanctions on Beijing. Tensions simmering in the contested South China Sea. The Philippines military chief urges Filipino fishermen to continue fishing in the nation's exclusive economic zone in defiance of the Chinese Coast Guard's new rules on detaining trespassers. The United States has imposed sanctions on an extremist Israeli.
Haiti's Prime Minister Gary Conille was hospitalized late Saturday in the capital Port-au-Prince just days after arriving in the country, the government said. It wasn't immediately known why Conille was hospitalized. The office of the Prime Minister said in a statement that Conille was feeling slightly unwell after a week of intense activities. It said he was stable. A person close to Conille who spoke to the Associated Press said the Prime Minister, who is asthmatic, appeared to have trouble breathing. Conille was chosen as Prime Minister on May 28th after a selection process. He previously served as Haiti's Prime Minister from October 2011 to May 2012 under then-President Michel Martelly. Earlier Saturday, Conille toured Haiti's main international airport, which recently reopened after gang violence forced it to close for nearly 3 months. In the Jabalia refugee camp, families line up for hours under the sun in front of water barrels waiting to fill up their buckets and containers. Every single drop is precious. Gaza's entire potable water infrastructure has almost all been destroyed by Israel. There is no water and there is no food. Our children died of thirst. We do not wash. There is dirt on our bodies. We do not enter the bathrooms. We do not have anything to survive. We have nothing. No water, no electricity, nothing. There is no water at all to drink. For 6 hours I've been searching for a little water, even from wastewater, to drink, but I cannot find it. Israeli forces entered Jabalia weeks ago and have subsequently pulled out water after weeks of fighting. The United Nations alerted about the risk of disease, including cholera, in the enclave due to the lack of clean drinking water and poor sanitation. Israel has been accused of deliberately damaging civilian infrastructure in Gaza as a weapon of war.
The United Nations humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths has weighed on the current global crisis threatening peace, linking it to leaders who have different priorities instead of addressing current issues affecting their people.
Look at Sudan, where two warring generals at that time, working together in a transitional process towards civilian rule, decided from one day to the next to take their country to war and to destroy the livelihoods of so many of their people. They didn't negotiate with each other, they didn't use dialogue. They simply decided that the gun was more effective than dialogue.
Griffiths further said the current global crisis was as a result of leaders failing to incorporate negotiations.
So we have lost our passion for peace, and the absence in this divided geopolitical world for political diplomacy to be the central part of how we end wars is something which I deeply regret.
He also pointed out that donors, largely countries, but also some foundations, have cut funding because of expenses like the increasing cost of living and rising energy prices.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Goodman. Have a good life.